An old cemetery wind blowing through crumbling tombstones and a faded photograph from 1847. The daguerreotype captures a moment of love, but when zoomed in, researchers discovered details that made history tremble. The man in the photo was identified as the heir to a powerful family, while the woman does not exist in any official records. The question is, who was she and what happened to her after the photo was taken? From libraries filled with the smell of old paper to forgotten crypts, each piece of the puzzle gradually reveals a story of forbidden love, mysterious disappearances, and a clan plot to erase all traces to protect its reputation. Tonight, you will hear the whispers of two people that history once tried to bury. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a gentle rhythm that seemed to hush the vast building into silence. Inside a quiet workroom, Dr. Carmen Rodriguez bent over the final box from the Harrison Williams donation. It was a grey Tuesday in November, and for 3 long weeks, she had devoted herself to reviewing each delicate piece of the collection. Every photograph, every hidden scrap of memory left behind after the death of Mrs. Eleanor Harrison Williams. Just one more box, Carmen murmured to herself, her voice barely louder than the rain. At 42, she had spent 2 decades living inside the shadows of the 19th century, her hands forever in white cotton gloves, her eyes forever searching for forgotten treasures. And still, her heart quickened at the chance of discovery. When she lifted the lid of the small velvet case, a flicker of excitement stirred deep inside her. Resting there untouched by time was a daguerreotype, gleaming silver on its copper plate, shielded under glass that had miraculously survived nearly 2 centuries. Carmen drew a slow breath. The image revealed a couple. The man, perhaps 30, with a carefully trimmed mustache. The woman with dark hair drawn into a graceful bun. They wore formal clothing of their time, but there was something about their faces that did not belong to the usual rigid portraits of the era. No, there was intimacy here, a closeness, a secret shared silently between them, frozen in silver. Interesting, Carmen whispered, lifting her magnifying glass. Very interesting. She turned the case over and found a faded label. New York, 1847, J.M. and M.C. The initials were written in a delicate trembling hand, as if the writer had been nervous or afraid. Carmen felt her pulse race. This was not just another family portrait. The next morning, she hurried into the museum's digital restoration lab. Miguel Santos was already waiting, preparing the massive scanner. "What do you have for me today?" he asked with a faint smile. "A daguerreotype from 1847, Carmen replied softly, placing it onto the scanning bed. "There's something unusual about it." Miguel adjusted his magnifying glass and leaned closer. Incredible. Whoever captured this was a master. Let's scan it at 4000 dpi. That should reveal every hidden detail. For 40 minutes, the machine worked in silence, its light creeping slowly over the plate, recording every thread of cloth, every shimmer of light. Carmen stood watching, patient, and yet unable to shake the sense that something extraordinary was about to emerge. "Ready," Miguel announced. "Now let's see what secrets are hiding here." On the wide screen, the digitized image appeared sharp and ghostly. Carmen leaned forward. The woman's dress revealed embroidery she had not seen before. The man's brooch gleamed with impossible clarity. "Enlarge the brooch," Carmen said quickly. The image filled the screen. What they saw made both of them fall silent. A heraldic shield perfectly engraved. Carmen knew it the instant she saw it. Her breath caught in her throat. It can't be, she whispered, and without another word, she left the lab and rushed into the museum's library. Surrounded by towering volumes on 19th century American heraldry, she searched, turning page after page. Hours passed in silence, and still she searched, because something in that shield had unsettled her more deeply than she cared to admit. The yellowed pages of the old volumes sighed beneath her fingertips, each turn releasing the faint scent of time. Carmen's eyes moved quickly, searching desperate, until, here it is. She whispered, breath-catching. Her hand hovered above a faded illustration in an 1834 armorial of New York's noble families. The heraldic shield was a perfect match to the one she had seen etched into the brooch. A rampant lion upon a golden field crowned with a ducal coronet. And beneath it, a Latin inscription, Veritas et Honor. The arms belonged to the Mendoza Carvajal family, one of the oldest and most powerful aristocratic houses to have crossed from Spain into the New World. Carmen's pulse quickened as she read. For centuries, they had been trusted advisors to Spanish royalty, and in 1847, the very year of the Daguerreotype, the family's heir in New York was Don Joaquin Mendoza Carvajal, 31 years old. JM, she murmured softly, recalling the initials on the box. Joaquin Mendoza. But who was MC? The records grew darker the further she read. Officially, Don Joaquin had died in 1851, unmarried, without heirs. But other less formal notes told another story of a romance too scandalous for the family to admit. A love carefully erased from memory. Carmen knew she needed help. That evening, she dialed the number of Professor Eduardo Ramirez, the most respected historian of 19th century America. A man who had dedicated his life to uncovering secrets families had hoped would remain forever buried. Professor, she said quietly, I found what I believe to be a daguerreotype of Don Joaquin Mendoza Carvajal, but in it, he appears beside a woman I cannot identify. Silence filled the line. Then finally his voice returned, hushed and deliberate. Carmen, you must come to my office immediately. There are matters concerning the Mendoza Carvajals that have never been made public. The professor's office lay atop a weathered building in Greenwich Village, its marble steps worn by generations. As Carmen climbed portfolio, pressed close to her chest, she felt as if the walls themselves carried secrets. Inside, Ramirez welcomed her with calm dignity. His white hair gleamed under the lamplight, his blue eyes piercing watchful. She sat opposite him, leather chair creaking under her weight. Professor, she asked softly, before I show you the photograph, what do you know of Don Joaquin's personal life? He poured his tea slowly, pausing in a silence so deep it pressed against the room. Then at last he spoke. What I am about to share has never been published. Don Joaquin Mendoza Carvajal fell in love with a woman far outside his station, beautiful, brilliant, but not of noble blood. For his family, the match was impossible. Do you know her name? Carmen leaned forward, breath held. Maria Carmen Delgado. The professor answered, pulling a folder from a private cabinet. The daughter of a modest textile merchant, well educated, a governess in the homes of the wealthy. Carmen froze. MC. The initials on the velvet box aligned perfectly. Exactly, the professor said gravely. Now, show me what you have. With trembling care, Carmen laid the digitized print upon his desk. The professor adjusted his glasses, leaning in for a long, silent study. At last, he exhaled. Extraordinary. This is the only known evidence of their union. I believe it was taken in secret as a symbolic marriage portrait. Carmen's voice lowered. And Maria Carmen. What became of her? Professor Ramirez removed his glasses, eyes filled with shadow. She vanished. In 1848, she disappeared without a trace. Joaquin fell into despair. He died 3 years later officially of tuberculosis. But many believe he died of a broken heart. The following morning, Carmen and the professor set out together toward the New York City archives, housed within a towering neoclassical building near City Hall. Whatever secrets remained would be waiting for them there. The New York City archives stood silent and imposing, its neoclassical facade cast in long shadows across the steps. Inside, the air smelled faintly of parchment and dust. The official who received them was Isabel Moreno, a woman of 50 with an impeccable reputation in the world of historical research. Her voice was calm, deliberate. Professor Ramirez, what a pleasure to see you again, she said warmly, leading them into a private consultation room reserved for delicate inquiries. Your message intrigued me. It's unusual to request files about disappearances from the 19th century. Carmen laid out the story of the daguerreotype and its connection to Maria Carmen Delgado Eva. Isabel listened intently, pen scratching across the pages of her notebook. Then she repeated the name softly to herself, as though testing it against memory. Maria Carmen Delgado Eva. She turned to her computer and began searching the digitized records. Let's see what we can find. For 2 long hours, she worked with meticulous care, combing through parish registers, municipal files, fragile papers that had survived centuries. Carmen watched with quiet awe, knowing that at any moment, one faded line of ink could unlock the mystery. Here, Isabel said at last, her finger steady on a fragile document dated March 1848, a record from St. Paul's Chapel. Maria Carmen requested papers for travel to France. Carmen and the professor exchanged a glance. France? Why? France. Isabel continued reading. She declared she had family in Paris, that she needed to leave urgently for family reasons. But Isabel tapped the margin of the page. There's a note here. Verify with higher authorities. The silence deepened as Isabel pulled another document from a separate file. And this is far more disturbing. A police report, April 1848. Maria Carmen was last seen at an inn near the Canadian border. She never crossed. Her belongings were discovered abandoned, including an unsent letter. Professor Ramirez leaned forward. The letter, what did it say? Isabel's voice lowered as she read from the fragile script. It was addressed to JM. It says, My love. If you are reading this, it means I was unable to reach our meeting place. You know our love is stronger than your family's threats. I will wait for you in Paris until you can join me. Always yours, MC. Carmen felt her chest tighten. Joaquin and Maria had planned an escape, a desperate flight to Paris. but someone had stopped her before she could leave. Even stranger, the Mendoza Carvajal family had publicly declared that Maria had arrived safely in France, while police files told a much darker truth. Days later, Carmen tracked down Pilar Ruiz Morales, 85 years old, whose great-grandmother Esperanza had once worked as a cook in the Mendoza Carvajal household. She found Pilar at Sunset Manor, a quiet nursing home on the Upper West Side. Mrs. Ruiz Carmen began gently. We are researching the history of the Mendoza Carvajal family in the 19th century. The old woman's eyes lit with memory. Ah, the Mendoza Carvajals. My great-grandmother Esperanza worked for them many years. Before she died, she confessed things. Terrible things. Professor Ramirez leaned forward. What exactly did she tell you? For several minutes, Pilar said nothing. Her gaze distant as though weighing whether the secret should be spoken. At last, she nodded slowly. In April of 1848, 3 men brought a young woman to the house in the middle of the night. She was unconscious, but alive. Carmen felt her pulse hammering. And what happened to her? My great-grandmother said the woman was taken to a room in the basement. She saw her briefly. Beautiful dark hair, traveling clothes, and she wore a medallion with the initials MC. Esperanza had been ordered to bring food to the basement for 3 days. The woman was alive, but very weak. She cried constantly. She repeated one name again and again, Joaquin. On the 4th day, Esperanza went down with another tray. The room was empty. Professor Ramirez asked, his voice barely audible. And Maria Carmen, what became of her? Pilar's hands trembled as she spoke. Esperanza never knew. But that night, she saw men loading something heavy into a carriage. She overheard words, the old Woodlawn Cemetery. They said no one would ever find her there. The room fell silent. Carmen realized they were no longer chasing shadows of rumor. They had uncovered testimony pointing toward a kidnapping and perhaps a murder. With Pilar's statement secured, Carmen reached out to Dr. Laura Mendizabal, a forensic archaeologist from Columbia University who specialized in historical investigations. When Carmen explained the story, the voice on the other end of the line was filled with awe. Carmen, Dr. Mendizabal whispered, "What you've uncovered is extraordinary." Laura had whispered it to her one evening in the quiet halls of the archaeology laboratory. If we truly uncover physical evidence, this could reshape the very way we understand 19th century American society. For 2 long weeks, Carmen labored through stacks of paperwork, seeking every permit she needed from the city and the Department of Historical Heritage. Old testimonies yellowed with time, and Pilar's solemn statement provided just enough weight for the investigation to move forward. And so, on a frigid December morning, Carmen and Laura set out with a small team of archaeologists. Their destination? The abandoned quarter of Woodlawn Cemetery. Its iron gates creaked its gravestones, leaning like weary sentinels of another century. Many 19th century graves still slumbered there forgotten. According to the fragile testimonies, Maria Carmen had been buried in one of the farthest corners, likely without a marker, a name, or even the dignity of official record. Laura, scanning brittle site plans, reminded the group, if she is here, she would have been hidden from the world deliberately. Armed with ground-penetrating radar, the team began their search. Day after day, they swept the soil in silence, waiting for shadows to reveal themselves. On the third day, strange anomalies emerged, disturbances that didn't align with the cemetery's maps. And by the fourth day, Laura's voice trembled. "Carmen, we found something." The reading suggested a hurried burial. The earth unsettled long ago. The excavation began with hands steady but hearts unsteady. Carmen stood nearby, caught between the discipline of science and the ache of human sorrow. Hours slipped by until finally, Laura called her closer. At the bottom of the trench lay the fragile outline of a human skeleton, partially preserved by the soil itself. Yet, it was not the bones alone that froze Carmen in place. Clutched against the earth blackened with age was a small silver medallion. Once cleaned with care, its secret was revealed engraved initials MC in the delicate calligraphy of the 19th century. Forensics confirmed what Carmen had feared. Maria Carmen Delgado Eva had suffered a brutal cranial injury, her life stolen by a blow from a blunt weapon. Carbon-14 analysis fixed her death between 1848 and 1850, the exact window of her vanishing. It was time Carmen decided for silence to end. She stood before the cameras of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where journalists gathered in expectant hush. What began as the mere cataloging of a donation she began has become the uncovering of one of the most tragic and most criminal love stories of 19th century America. Methodically, she laid out the story. The Daguerreotype, the brittle archives Pilar Ruiz Morales' testimony, and at last the skeletal remains with the medallion of initials. The evidence is clear, Carmen continued. Maria Carmen Delgado Eva was seized under the orders of the Mendoza Carvajal family when she tried to reunite with Don Juan in France. She was imprisoned in their household, silenced, and ultimately murdered so that her love with the family's heir would never be known. Professor Ramirez then rose to frame the tragedy within history itself. This case reveals the immense power aristocratic families held in the 19th century, power not only to guard fortunes, but to dictate the very destinies of those who threatened their name. A hand shot up from the crowd. Dr. Rodriguez, what became of Don Juan after Maria Carmen's disappearance? The reply was heavy. He was deceived. His family convinced him that Maria had gone on to France, that she had chosen a new life without him. He waited, always waiting for her letters to arrive. None ever did. He died in 1851, never knowing she had been murdered by the family whose name he bore. The revelation spread like wildfire, igniting both fascination and unease. Soon after, Carmen received threat-sharp words from lawyers representing the surviving Mendoza Carvajal descendants. But she stood unshaken. Maria Carmen deserves her truth. Her memory is not for sale. 6 months later, beneath a sky the color of fading ash, Carmen placed the final stone upon a monument. New York City had sanctioned it in quiet acknowledgement of a lost woman's stolen life. And there it stands, marking the name of Maria Carmen Delgado Eva. Her story, once buried in silence, now echoing across time. The monument, standing quietly in the renovated corner of Woodlawn Cemetery, bore an inscription Carmen had written with her own trembling hand. Maria Carmen Delgado Eva, 1817-1848. Her love was stronger than the conventions of her time, and her memory is more lasting than the power that tried to silence her. The original daguerreotype, now rested in a place of honor within the Metropolitan Museum's permanent collection, accompanied by the story Carmen had painstakingly uncovered. Thousands came to gaze upon the small silvery plate, drawn not just to the image itself, but to the tragic love story that had survived the crushing weight of 19th century silence. Carmen, Professor Ramirez told her at the inauguration of the monument, "You have done something extraordinary. You haven't only solved a mystery, you have given voice to a woman silenced for more than 170 years. Among the crowd stood Pilar Ruiz Morales, 86 years old, insisting on attending despite her frailty. Her eyes shimmered as she whispered to Carmen, "My great-grandmother can finally rest." Esperanza would be proud to know that her testimony helped bring justice. But this was no longer just a personal story. The case reverberated across the nation. Historians began reopening similar accounts. Stories of young women and men whose lives had been crushed beneath the iron heel of aristocratic power. Carmen's discovery had sparked a conversation that official history had long avoided, how privilege had hidden its crimes beneath marble halls and gilded silence. International universities sent her invitations offering posts and accolades. But Carmen chose to remain in New York. There she founded an institution devoted to investigating historical disappearances. She declared to National Geographic, "Maria Carmen cannot be the only one. There are countless voices erased by power waiting to be heard." The daguerreotype, it seemed, had unveiled far more than a romance. It revealed a system, a machinery of oppression, where the wealthy acted as judge, jury, and executioner whenever their pride was threatened. One soft spring afternoon, Carmen found herself staring once more at the photograph. She had handled it countless times, yet something had escaped her notice until then. In the faintest corner of the plate, almost hidden in shadow, she saw a tiny engraving. She leaned closer. The words were fragile, but clear. "Forever. J and MC." A smile crossed her lips. Even as the world had sought to erase them, Don Juan and Maria Carmen had carved their eternity into metal. Their love had outlived both silence and cruelty, surviving in a silver plate that refused to forget. The daguerreotype had kept its secret for more than 170 years. And now, at last, it had spoken loud enough for the world to hear. The names of Mendoza Carvajal and Maria Carmen Delgado Eva became entwined not in scandal, but in truth proof that love is stronger than any convention, and that truth, however delayed, always finds its way to the surface. The photograph, once locked in obscurity, traveled across oceans. Museums from London to Tokyo requested to display it, framing it not only as a relic of romance, but as a universal emblem of justice, memory, and human courage. In the quiet of her office, Carmen closed the file for the final time. This was more than an academic triumph. It was an act of remembrance, a reclamation of dignity. Maria Carmen and Don Juan, separated in life by cruelty and custom, had been reunited in history. Their voices restored, their story immortalized. Their eternal love, etched forever on silver and copper, would continue to whisper to generations yet unborn that no injustice, however deeply buried, can remain silent forever. And so, the daguerreotype of 1847, once so mysterious, had fulfilled its destiny. It had told the truth. And in doing so, it had changed forever the way we remember the power of love. and the duty to preserve the voices of those silenced by time.